By much popular demand, we are going to talk about compost today, and then specifically, how much compost should we be using? You know, I've heard and read online many places that using as much compost as possible is the way to go. And I can tell you that in this garden, that is not the method. And I'm going to explain to you my method, and I'm going to try and explain to you why I do it that way. If you've been watching the channel for any period of time, you know that we are currently in mode of getting our gardens ready very fast as possible now. We have built 2 beds, so we've filled these up completely, so we'll be able to talk about that. Then we're going to be amending some beds, and when I say amending, I don't mean the fertilizers for this conversation. I mean topping off the beds, the garden beds for, you know, the season, adding in soil or compost or what have you. And then we've got other ones that we haven't added yet. Here's my compost piles. I run a 2-bin system. We'll do another video about it in depth later and why I do 2 bins instead of 3 or 80 or 500 or whatever. But this is the bin that we're building. So it's poop, cuttings, vegetable scraps, and straw mostly, and hopefully soon there'll be some more leaves. And then here's the done bin. So it was completely done, and then I added a load of leaves late, but you can see the composition of it. It's mostly done. We do have some leaves and stuff in it, but we will still use this as normal and just kind of go through it. But for the year, if I didn't get any soil from anywhere, this bin filled up to about right there is what I would go through in a whole year for my garden. So I'm going to take you around and just show you the different compositions of soil. Not clear and cut like a lot of people want it to be. It's very subjective, and a little bit of knowledge in this will go a long way in getting you going into putting the right amount of compost into your garden. Compost is, in my mind, it's a fertilizer and an amendment, okay? So it definitely feeds your garden. It adds moisture retentive properties to an extent. It adds organic matter, which is really the purpose of it. And it continues to break down and feed your soil. The issue is, as anything breaks down in your garden, it ties up nutrients to some extent, right? So I'll get into a story later where we put wood chips in our garden and we had nitrogen tie up and just resulted in a terrible garden, which led me down a path to be able to talk about this for long story short for right now. So we did all that, and I learned that there's a balance that we have to strike. There's a balance in nature that we have to strike, because you got to remember, we're basically working in nature here. It's no different than anything else. Now I use a 2 to 3 year process. Well, basically, we're going to call it 2. The first year doesn't count, and that's when I initially fill my beds. So initially filling a bed, which is right here, you have 2 options. 1 is pure topsoil, and then 2 is what I use, and it's because it's what's available to me, and that's this 50-50 mix. So it's 50% topsoil, 50% compost. And so you can see, it's a little dry right now, but that's because we water through the drip. But you can see it's got a little bit in there that needs to break down. But overall, it's a solid mix. It's got sand added to it for drainage, and it's overall, I'm happy with it. If I had it my way, I would start a garden with 75% topsoil, 25% compost. Now I opt, because my garden's the size that it is, I get it by a pickup truckload. I usually do probably 2 truckloads a year. And it, like I said, it varies and it flops back and forth from year to year, but I get it. And if you live close to me from Wilmington Compost Company, and you let them know I sent you, and they'll give you a discount. I don't get a kickback of any sort. I just like to help them out because they're really good at what they do. But I start with the 50-50 mix, and then you go through the growing season, you grow, whatever. Comes time to top off, you know, your raised beds will lower the level of the soil as it breaks down, settles, stuff like that. So we'll add more. So the second year I come in, and then I will add plain old topsoil. So this is a bed that I topped off. So this is my 50-50 year. And then last year was my topsoil year. So this is the topsoil. And you can see how little there is in there to break down. What is in there is either leftover from mulch or stuff that's fallen. As you can see, the leaves and stuff falling out of the trees. So that's what's in there. But you can see it holds moisture pretty good. It's not overly sandy or anything like this. So that's how we balance what we do between going back and forth between each one. And just to give you a side-by-side comparison, that's the 50-50. So they do a really good job. There's only like small amounts of sticks and stuff in there. Nothing much. I've seen places that just have like completely subpar compost. If I was to add pure compost to my garden, which I don't buy anymore, I only make it, and I showed you the level that I make it, I come out to all of these gardens and I will put maybe an inch on top of it to a half inch to an inch, however you want to say it. And I'll just put that on top and work it in. And then that'll give it the nutrients that it needs to kind of keep the soil active, refeed it, give it some organic matter and stuff like that. But you also got to understand, I mulch heavily, very heavily. And I mulch to retain water, I mulch for temperature properties, and I mulch for weed suppression. And so let me show you how that works. So we mulched this bed back in September, and it was probably that high in mulch. And now you can see the surface of the soil. So what that means is all of this is broken down and is in this soil right here. So we need to make sure that we don't add anything else excessive to it to keep it going. You can see the weeds are popping out, and that's just simply because the mulch started to break down. Where there wasn't as much sun built up, you can see there's still a half inch of mulch on the ground and a pine cone, and there's no weeds growing. Essentially what that means is I'm making compost inside of my garden. And if you haven't done it, you should definitely do it where you mulch your garden at the beginning of the season. Let's say your tomatoes, they like deep mulch, and then you come back at the end of the season and see how much mulch is left, and you will be completely shocked by how much is left by the end of the season. So I'll take this bed here, last year was just topsoil as well. Okay, now I'm gonna put 50-50 mix on top of that this year, and same with all the beds in this section. They're all gonna get 50-50, and then we'll come back and we'll put topsoil the next year. Now the question you might be asking is, why would you do something like that? It seems like a little bit extra work. Right, it is extra work, but I came through one year and I got a wild hair and I said, I'm putting wood mulch down, I'm done, and I'm gonna put it on just as thick as they recommend. And basically what happened is the wood mulch just straight sucked. It caused nitrogen tie-up, so I didn't have a lot of nitrogen coming to my plants, bad growth, this, that, and the other. Couldn't get the fertilizer down into the soil to help, so kind of messed me up for that year. So I pulled it all out the next year, and I added inches of 100% compost, and high quality compost too. And then I still didn't have a great year, so I decided, well, like, hey, maybe I need to go get a soil test. I got a soil test, and when I got the results back, I mean, first of all, I went and I got my soil test at my extension service, so it was quality. Don't do a home soil test because they suck. But we got a soil test, and we found out there was a lot of problems with our soil. But the biggest problem was the amount of organic matter in the soil. To the extent where the gentleman told me, he was like, you have more organic soil or organic matter in your soil than 90% of the people do. And he was like, well, why do you have that? And I said, well, no, you have to remember I'm talking to a soil scientist. And I said, well, I read that you need to add, a couple inches of compost. And he said, absolutely not. That is 100% false. You do not just add more and more and more compost. You got to find a balance, right? So you can get your soil too nutrient rich. You can get too much organic matter. The organic matter can have the same effect as the wood chips did, where it's tying up nutrients to break down. It can cause too much drainage, so you don't get that moisture retentive properties. Whew, lost my words there for a second. And the biggest problem that it caused, I'll see if I can't find a spot and show you. You got to remember, this is a bed in which, hey, look at that little radish that has been breaking down. So basically what we have on top is just basically mulched compost. But if you move it out of the way, the biggest thing you have is, see that crust? You get that crust on top, right? And when you get too much organic matter, you get a lot of crust that really it doesn't let the water penetrate down, and it doesn't let the air penetrate down. That comment about the air surprised you? Let me tell you, it surprised me too, because I knew that they took oxygen through the roots, but I always figured that like it didn't really matter unless you had like super thick soils, but it clearly mattered. So that eliminates the oxygen getting to the roots, which hinders the growth, which makes them weaker, which gives you pest pressures, which is inviting weeds, which is just causing a whole plethora of problems, which we don't really want to deal with. So by adding the topsoil every other year, we're minimizing that completely. So I go based on how my garden works, how it grows the previous year. Last year, the garden did well. So we're gonna do the 50-50, add it in. Next year, we'll come back and we'll do the topsoil. If it does well for the topsoil, then we may just use our own compost and add it in. And we'll just put a thin layer on top. Now, a lot of people don't have access to places where they can get bulk quality topsoil. And you can go to like a home improvement store and buy bags of topsoil and add it. So for each one of these beds, if I was to add a bag of topsoil, it's a stretch, but I would use probably 3 bags, which is about probably $5 worth of topsoil for each bed. Now we're just talking about topsoil, no fertilizer, no compost, nothing, just topsoil. If I was adding compost, I'd probably add about 2 bags. And if I was feeling real froggy, I would do a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 topsoil to 1 compost. And that would make, that would be my 75-25 mix that I would love to use, which hopefully we can use that next year. I've been talking to the compost company about that, and we may make something like that next year for my garden, see how it does. But that's what I like to do because I'm eliminating excessive drainage, I'm feeding my soil, and I'm not getting excessive amounts of organic matter because it's like anything else. Like you want to eat healthy, but you can get fat off of eating carrots. Now you got to eat a lot of carrots, but you can get fat and die off eating carrots. It's the same thing. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So just be very careful this season as you're topping off your garden beds and putting it in. If you don't believe me, just add a bag of topsoil and just to kind of help minimize it. But we've seen people time and time again start a new garden and start with complete compost and then come back and be like, why did my garden grow? And it's like, well, use 100% compost. It's not going to grow. Because a lot of people think that their soil is tainted or not good. But look all around me. What do you see all around me? You see nothing but trees growing in native topsoil, flourishing, populating the earth and doing their job. And that is all because of the topsoil. So your soil is not really tainted unless you had a chemical spill or something. So topsoil is a good thing, very good thing. There's a reason why it's here. There's a reason why people have, well, not right now, but lush lawns, wildflower fields, stuff like that. It's a beautiful thing. But this is my recipe for amending a garden, topping off raised beds, using the correct ratios. And just to recap for you one more time, the first year, 50-50 mix. The second year, pure topsoil. The third year, 50-50 mix. Or I will just add some topsoil and compost mix myself. Maybe just a little bit of compost, but for the most part, I just keep it nice and simple. Go through it. Your garden's gonna grow. Amend with fertilizer if you wanna do that, which I do. I believe in it wholeheartedly, so I do add it. And then I use it to supplement throughout the season, but then I revitalize my soil and just feed that bacteria and feed that biome.